My name is Samantha. I'm 35 years old, and I thought I knew every corner of my life. I woke up that morning like any other, the smell of coffee in the kitchen, the sunlight spilling softly across our living room floor. But there was a strange silence, a silence that pressed against my chest like a heavy weight. I stepped into the living room, expecting to find my husband, Mark, reading the newspaper, or maybe sipping his coffee. But what I saw stopped me cold. A woman, someone I didn't know was there, laughing quietly, leaning too close to him. I froze, my heart hammering in my ears. My mind raced. Who is she? What is happening? And in that frozen moment, I did something I would never forget. I grabbed my phone. I began to record. Questions started spinning in my mind, faster than I could answer. Who was she really? How long had this been happening? And most importantly, what would Mark do when he realized I knew? I didn't speak. I didn't move too quickly. I just watched. Every laugh, every gesture, every glance between them screamed secrets I wasn't supposed to see. But the more I watched, the more I realized this wasn't just a fleeting mistake. It was something that had been quietly building, hidden beneath the surface of my perfect life. And then I noticed it, the small, almost imperceptible shift in his expression when our eyes met, a flicker of panic. That was the moment I understood that everything I thought I knew was about to change forever. Don't forget to tell us in the comments what state you're watching from and what time is it there now. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Like and share, let's continue. Before that day, my life had been ordinary in a way that felt safe. Mark and I had been married for 10 years. We met in college, both studying business. Both dreamers who thought we could conquer the world together. Our wedding was small, intimate, just family and close friends in a garden ceremony that felt like something out of a fairy tale. We had routines, lazy Sunday mornings, where we'd make pancakes together, long walks in the park with our golden retriever, Bailey, and quiet dinners after work where we'd talk about our days. I loved him, or at least I thought I did. I had dreams too small ones, like opening a little bakery where I could experiment with recipes my grandmother taught me, or taking a trip to Italy someday to see the Amalfi Coast. Our home, a modest 2-bedroom house in the suburbs, felt like our sanctuary. The walls were painted in warm colors, family photos lined the hallway, and every corner held a memory. Friends would say we were enviable. Sarah, my best friend since high school, would often joke that she wanted what Mark and I had. But now, as I stared at that living room, I realized I had been living with blinders on. The little doubts I'd brushed aside, the late nights at work that became more frequent over the past 6 months, the extra texts that would make him smile in ways that seemed distant from me, the small irritations I'd blamed on stress from his new project at the office, suddenly became signs I could no longer ignore. And then there was me. I had always thought I was strong, in control. I worked as a graphic designer from home, which gave me flexibility, but also meant I was often alone with my thoughts. I prided myself on being rational, level-headed, someone who could handle whatever life threw at me. But that morning, all my control slipped. I felt a mix of fear, anger, and disbelief. My hands shook as I held the phone. And yet, part of me couldn't stop recording, as if capturing it all might somehow make the chaos make sense. I remember thinking about my parents, who had been married for 40 years before my father passed away 2 years ago. They had weathered storms together, supported each other through thick and thin. I had always imagined Mark and I would have that same kind of enduring love. But standing there, watching this unfold, I wondered if I had been naive all along. Time seemed to stretch. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. The woman, who I would later learn was named Leah, laughed at something Mark said, leaning closer. She was younger than me, maybe late 20s, with long dark hair and a confidence that made my stomach churn. She wore business casual clothes, a crisp white blouse, and dark slacks, suggesting she wasn't just some random person off the street. Mark, realizing I was watching, froze. I could see it in his eyes, guilt, panic, maybe even regret. His face went pale, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Leah followed his gaze and turned to look at me. Her expression shifted from casual friendliness to awkward surprise. I didn't confront them. I didn't yell. I just stayed there, recording, letting the weight of the moment settle in. The coffee maker in the kitchen beeped, signaling it had finished brewing, a mundane sound that felt absurdly normal against the chaos unfolding in front of me. And then it happened. Mark reached out, touched her hand gently, as if to reassure her, and in that instant, the world tilted. Everything I had known about trust, love, and honesty shattered. I turned and left the room silently, my bare feet padding against the hardwood floor. My mind raced with questions. Should I confront him now? Should I wait? Could I even forgive what I had just witnessed? I paced the hallway, phone clutched tightly in my hand, feeling the warmth of the device against my palm. The temptation to play the recording back, to analyze every gesture, every word, was nearly unbearable. I heard them talking in hushed tones in the living room. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the urgency in Mark's voice. Part of me wanted to burst back in there and demand answers. But another part of me, the part that had always been cautious, always tried to think things through, held me back. I went to our bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed we had shared for a decade. The room smelled faintly of Mark's cologne, a scent that used to comfort me but now made me feel sick. I looked at the photo on my nightstand, our wedding day, both of us beaming, so full of hope and promise. Had that version of us ever really existed, or had I been living in a fantasy? I realized I was at a crossroads. I could let this destroy me, or I could use it to find the truth, no matter how painful. And then the thought hit me there was more going on than just a fleeting betrayal. The pieces didn't quite fit. If this was an affair, why would he bring her to our home in the morning? Why wouldn't they be more careful? Something else was at play here. Something I needed to understand before jumping to conclusions. About 20 minutes later, I heard the front door close. I looked out the window and saw Leah walking to her car, a silver Honda parked in front of our house. Mark stood in the doorway, watching her leave. His shoulders slumped. When he came back inside, he found me in the bedroom. His eyes were red, as if he'd been on the verge of tears. "Sam," he started, his voice cracking. "I can explain." "Then explain," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Who is she? And why was she here?" He sat down on the other side of the bed, keeping distance between us. "Her name is Leah. She works at the firm. I've been mentoring her on a big project." "Mentoring," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "At 7 in the morning? In our home?" "I know how it looks," he said quickly. "I know, but it's not what you think. We had an early meeting scheduled, and I suggested we meet here because the office wouldn't be open yet. I thought it would be more convenient." "Convenient," I echoed. "Mark, I saw the way you two were together. That wasn't just professional." He closed his eyes, rubbing his face with his hands. "I've been stupid, Sam. I admit that. Leah has been going through a rough time. Her father is sick, and she's been struggling at work. I've been trying to help her, to be supportive, and maybe I let boundaries get blurred. But I swear to you, there's nothing romantic between us." I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But trust, once broken, doesn't just magically repair itself. "Show me your phone," I said. He hesitated, and that hesitation told me more than words ever could. "Mark, if you have nothing to hide, show me your phone." Slowly, reluctantly, he pulled his phone from his pocket and handed it to me. My hands trembled as I scrolled through his messages with Leah. There were dozens of them, spanning back months. Most were work-related, discussing project timelines, client meetings, strategy sessions. But there were others that made my chest tighten, messages sent late at night, casual conversations about movies and music, inside jokes that suggested a level of familiarity that went beyond professional mentorship. "You've been texting her at midnight," I said, holding up the phone. "Talking about things that have nothing to do with work." "We're friends," he said defensively. "Is that a crime?" It is when your wife doesn't even know she exists, I shot back. Mark, you never mentioned her. Not once. In all these months of mentoring her, you never thought to tell me about this important person in your work life. He didn't have an answer for that. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I stood up, needing to move, needing to do something with the energy coursing through my body. I need time, I said finally. I need time to think about this, to figure out what I'm feeling. Sam, please, he said, standing up too. Don't shut me out. Let's talk about this. We are talking about it, I said. But right now, I need space. I'm going to stay at Sarah's for a few days. The look of devastation on his face almost made me reconsider. Almost. But I knew that if I stayed, I would either explode in anger or crumble into forgiveness before I was ready for either. I needed clarity. And I couldn't find it in this house. Surrounded by memories and emotions that clouded my judgment. Over the next 3 days at Sarah's apartment, I replayed the video obsessively. I watched the way Leah laughed, the way Mark touched her hand, trying to decode every micro-expression, every gesture. Sarah, bless her heart, tried to be supportive without being judgmental. What does your gut tell you? She asked one evening as we sat on her couch, sharing a bottle of wine. My gut is confused, I admitted. Part of me thinks he's telling the truth, that it really is just a mentorship that got too friendly, but another part of me feels like there's something he's not telling me. Have you thought about talking to Leah? Sarah suggested. I had thought about it. In fact, I'd found her on social media, Leah Morrison, 28 years old, marketing specialist at Mark's firm. Her profile was mostly private, but from what I could see, she seemed like a normal young professional. No red flags, no obvious signs of someone who would intentionally pursue a married man. On the 4th day, I made a decision. I needed to hear Leah's side of the story. I sent her a message through LinkedIn, keeping it professional and non-confrontational. Hi Leah, this is Samantha, Mark's wife. I'd like to talk to you about the situation from the other morning. Would you be willing to meet for coffee? She responded within an hour. Yes, I think that would be good. I'm sorry for any confusion or hurt I may have caused. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. at Starbucks on Main Street? My heart raced as I typed back my confirmation. The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, choosing a table in the corner where we could talk privately. When Leah walked in, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, curiosity, and surprisingly, a bit of sympathy. Up close, she looked younger than she had in my living room, and there was a nervousness in her eyes that suggested she was genuinely uncomfortable with the situation. Thank you for meeting me, I said as she sat down, clutching her iced latte. Of course, she said quietly. I owe you an explanation, or at least my perspective on things. For the next hour, Leah told me her story. She had started at the firm 8 months ago, fresh out of grad school and eager to prove herself. Mark had been assigned as her mentor, and he had been incredibly supportive and helpful. She admitted that she had developed a crush on him early on, something she said she was ashamed of, knowing he was married. But I never acted on it, she insisted. I never tried to pursue anything with him. He was always professional, always talked about you with such love and respect. I think that's part of why I admired him so much. He seemed like such a good person. Then why all the late-night texts? I asked. Why the early morning meetings at our house? She looked down at her drink. The texts were mostly me reaching out when I was stressed or overwhelmed. My dad was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 6 months ago, and it's been really hard. Mark knew about it because I had to take time off for appointments, and he was understanding. I think I leaned on him too much, treated him like a friend when I should have kept better boundaries. And the meeting at our house? She winced. That was my fault. I had a client presentation the next day, and I was panicking. I called Mark at like 6 in the morning, practically in tears, saying I needed help. He suggested meeting at your house because it was on the way to the office and we could go over the presentation materials before the workday started. I should have said no, should have realized how inappropriate it was. I wasn't thinking about how it would look, I was just desperate for help. As she spoke, I found myself believing her. There was a vulnerability in her words, a genuine remorse that seemed hard to fake. "Did Mark ever make advances toward you?" I asked directly. "No," she said firmly. "Never, not once. He was always appropriate. If anything, I'm the one who crossed lines by being too familiar, by texting him about personal stuff. But I swear to you, there was never anything physical or romantic between us. I would never do that to someone's marriage." We talked for another 30 minutes, and by the end, I felt a weight lifting. Was their friendship inappropriate? Yes. Had boundaries been crossed? Absolutely. But was it the betrayal I had initially feared? Maybe not. When I got back to Sarah's apartment, I called Mark. "We need to talk," I said. "Can you come here?" He arrived within 20 minutes, looking like he hadn't slept much. We sat in Sarah's living room. She had graciously given us privacy, and I told him about my conversation with Leah. "She told me about her father," I said, "about how she leaned on you for support. Why didn't you tell me any of this?" He sighed deeply. "I don't know. At first, it didn't seem important, just work stuff. But then, as things got more personal, I felt weird about it. I knew you might not understand, might think I was getting too involved in a coworker's personal life, so I just didn't mention it. Which was wrong. I see that now. Mark, I don't care if you're friends with people from work," I said. "What I care about is honesty. What I care about is feeling like I'm part of your life, not someone you keep secrets from." "You're right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I messed up. I let a friendship develop in the shadows, and that was disrespectful to you and to our marriage. I'm sorry, Sam. I'm so sorry." But there was still something nagging at me, something that didn't quite add up. "Mark," I said slowly, "when I walked in that morning and saw you two together, you touched her hand. Why?" He looked confused. "I touched her hand?" "Yes," I said, pulling out my phone and showing him the video. "Right here. She was upset about something, and you reached out and touched her hand." He watched the video, and I saw the moment recognition dawned on his face. "Oh," he said quietly. "Right before you walked in, Leah had just gotten a call from her mom. Her dad had been admitted to the hospital overnight. She was telling me about it, trying not to cry, and I reached out to comfort her. It was instinct, Sam. She was hurting, and I wanted to help. I felt my own eyes welling up with tears. All this time, I had been interpreting that gesture as intimacy, as evidence of an affair, but it was compassion. It was one human being comforting another in a moment of pain. "Why didn't you just tell me all of this from the beginning?" I asked, my voice breaking. "When I confronted you that morning, why didn't you explain about her father, about the hospital call?" "I was panicking," he admitted. "When I saw you standing there, saw the look on your face, I just froze. I knew how bad it looked, and I didn't know how to explain it in a way that wouldn't sound like excuses. I was scared, Sam. Scared that I'd already lost you. The truth settled over me like a blanket complex, messy, but ultimately clear. This wasn't a story of infidelity. It was a story of poor boundaries, of failed communication, of two people who had let their busy lives create distance between them. Mark had made mistakes, significant ones. He had developed a friendship that crossed professional lines, had kept it hidden from me, had failed to set appropriate boundaries with a younger colleague who was vulnerable and going through a crisis. But he hadn't cheated. He hadn't betrayed our vows. He had simply been human, flawed, and imperfect. 2 weeks later, Leah's father passed away. Mark told me about the funeral, asked if it would be okay if he attended. I said yes, and I went with him. At the service, I watched Leah say goodbye to her father, watched her break down in tears, and I understood something I hadn't before. Mark's kindness toward her hadn't been about romance or attraction. It had been about basic human decency, about being there for someone who was suffering. After the funeral, Leah approached me. "Thank you for coming," she said, her eyes red and swollen. "And thank you for understanding. I know I made things difficult for you and Mark. I'm going to be more careful about boundaries going forward." "I'm sorry about your father," I said, and I meant it. In that moment, I didn't see her as a threat or as the other woman. I just saw her as someone in pain, someone who had lost a parent too soon, just like I had 2 years ago. Mark and I started going to couples therapy after everything settled down. It wasn't easy. There were sessions where we cried, where we argued, where we had to confront uncomfortable truths about our marriage. We had been coasting, taking each other for granted, letting work and routines replace real connection and communication. The therapist helped us establish better boundaries, both in our marriage and in our relationships with others. Mark had a difficult conversation with Leah about maintaining appropriate professional distance, and while they still work together, their interactions are now purely work-related. I learned something important through all of this, that jumping to conclusions, even when they seem obvious, can blind you to the actual truth. That gesture I had interpreted as intimacy was actually compassion. Those late-night texts I had seen as evidence of an affair were actually someone reaching out in crisis. I'm not saying Mark was blameless. He should have been more transparent, should have set better boundaries from the start. But I also had to acknowledge my own role in creating an environment where he felt he couldn't be honest about a friendship because he feared my reaction. 3 months after that horrible morning, Mark and I renewed our vows. Not in a big ceremony, just the two of us in our backyard, with Bailey as our witness. We wrote new promises to each other, promises about honesty, about communication, about not letting the mundane details of life crowd out what really matters. I still have that video on my phone. I've thought about deleting it 100 times, but I keep it as a reminder that things are not always what they seem, a reminder that trust requires both transparency and the willingness to believe the best in someone until proven otherwise, a reminder that love is not just a feeling. It's a daily choice to see your partner as fully human, capable of mistakes, worthy of grace. So I ask you, what would you have done in my place? When you saw that video, what did you assume? And more importantly, could you have held back your anger and your hurt long enough to seek the truth, even when every instinct told you to run or to fight? Have you ever jumped to a conclusion about someone you love, only to find out later that you were wrong? How did that change the way you approach trust and communication? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own relationships or your own assumptions, please subscribe to our channel. We share real stories like this one, stories that challenge us, that make us feel deeply, and that remind us of our shared humanity. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for staying until the end. And remember, sometimes the truth is more complicated, more nuanced, and ultimately more hopeful than we first imagine.